May the words of my mouth and the meditation of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Amen. Please be seated. Since this is our day of our annual meeting, this sermon time takes the form of my pastoral address to the parish. It's still a sermon, but it's that I've looked at our life together as I've worked with this sermon in different ways. Because, we've got this incredible story about Jesus here. Jesus' story where he goes home to Nazareth and they hear what he has to say. Release to the captive, sight to the blind, the year of the Lord's favor, which was the Jubilee year, a year set aside in the law to forgive all debts, to have property go back to the original inheritor's home, to have that settling in of society, the evening back out, so that people don't forever continually go deeper and deeper in debt or get richer and richer and richer. To bring that divide back to the year of the Lord's favor. And it's fulfilled today in your midst. Boy, that's the kind of sermon we all want to hear. We are the locus of God's favor. We are the place where God's promises are set. And they looked at each other and they smiled at each other and they go, boy, Joseph's son sure has grown up well, hasn't he? We're not sure where he learned this, but wow. And they all spoke well of him. And then he got to meddling. You have that response to a sermon that you always want. Wow, that was great. But then he pushed. And he says, you're still not hearing it. You're not understanding what God is about. And he tells them their own stories about the time when there was such a great famine in the land. It hadn't rained for so long. There was no food. And there were so many people, so many widows without a way to take care of themselves, who are the people of God, the chosen people. And God's prophet was not sent to one of them, but to the foreign woman in Sidon, to the foreign widow in Zarephath in Sidon. Well, wait a minute. Didn't you just say God's promise is to be fulfilled here? And now you're pushing us and saying, that's not the way God works. Look beyond. And in Elisha's time, it happened the same way. There were all kinds of lepers in Israel at that point when Syria had invaded, and the Syrian general, Naaman, was a leper. And he was the one cured of his leprosy. The foreign general, not the lepers in Israel. And at this point, they'd had enough. He said, that's not the way we've always thought about it. We've never really thought, that might be our story, but we've never really thought about it that way before, and we don't hear anything. You know how when that glimmer of truth begins to get in, sometimes that results in the biggest rage. We don't really want to hear that truth. And they take him, there's an incredible cliff in Nazareth, and they take him up there and they want to throw him off the cliff. Now, that's not what any preacher wants as the result of their sermons, but this is where Jesus ended up. By saying what God is about is always pushing us out to those boundary places, to those who are truly outside. You are the chosen people, but your role as chosen people is not for you. The fulfillment of God's promise here in our midst is not specifically only for you. 2002, I got to tell you some stories. I've been telling stories about this parish down in North Carolina. So you get a little storyline. I think you need to hear my stories too. 2002, I was called as the rector here. This was not an unhealthy parish, but it was a little bit of a sleepy parish. You had a rector who had fed you well with good sermons and teachings and things, but who tended to stay home, inside. And so did you. I got here and I really wasn't aware of some of the dynamics, and August of 2002 happened to be the 200th anniversary of our diocese. And there was a big diocesan event down in Wolfboro where we had been told by the diocese, cancel morning services, so encourage everybody to go to the lake shore in Wolfboro for a big diocesan celebration of the Eucharist for our bicentennial. Well, you know, that happened to also be the weekend of the Bach Festival, and there was a worship service down the road at the Congregational Church with all the Bach Festival musicians, and I was invited to preach at it. And I said, well, I'm not preaching here at 10 o'clock, because this service, we had an 8 o'clock service, but we canceled the 10. So I went down the street and preached there. That week, I had a parishioner come and get in my face, right in my face, and say, how dare you? You belong to us. I was kind of glad there wasn't a cliff in North Conway. Actually, there is, but that parishioner I wasn't going to meet that parishioner up on top of Cathedral Ledge. How dare you? You belong to us. And that helped tip me off to a feeling here. And the way I've likened it to, the way I look at it was sort of like the wagons had been circled. And the community sense of each other was so strong, but it was one of needing to hang on to each other for survival. It's dangerous out there. We might die. And how dare you get outside of our circle because you belong to us. You're part of this circle here. 2003, it was a rocky start here. 2003, the eve of the U.S. going into Iraq. And I wanted to pray for peace. And so I went online and looked to find out where there was a nationwide effort to organize peace prayer vigils. And there wasn't one organized here. So I signed up. And we got candles and went to Schuler Park and stood in silent prayer at 7 o'clock on that evening. Vestry meeting was a couple weeks after that, and somebody did call me to warn me that people were actually going to come to a vestry meeting. I try to get people to come to vestry meetings, but people were there was stir afoot. The phone calls were going out. We need to do something about that woman. And then we began talking after that. I think there was something in that vestry meeting where we made sure that every person who had something to say was heard. It wasn't just the one who yelled loudest, but every person who came was heard. And there began to grow a different feel here. That just because you weren't bullied into something, that we were able to gather as a community. And I know that my own vision of who this parish is changed drastically on one conversation in particular. I threw out for group conversation at one point, so what would happen if our buildings burned down? Who are we? And you know what one of the first things that people were concerned about was, where would we have the thrift shop? It's not all just hanging on to each other, looking in. We had within our deep DNA, because it had been going on for so long, an already formed ministry that was so looking out. So rather than throwing me off the cliff, we journeyed together. Moving from a flavor of what God has is for us here, to the point where I think we are still gathered in a circle, but we're looking out. We are still committed to our connection as community, but we've been able to let the thrift shop lead us. To be able to hold that up, we've been able to break some of the other ways that we held on to each other for survival instead of for strength, for us instead of for the world. And I got to tell you, it was a pretty powerful thing for me to be able to brag on you as I talked about you in North Carolina, as I talked about this gathered community circle led by a faithful ministry that is turned and looking out. And we've seen in this last few years more and more witness to that. We've never told our story in that way before. It's no longer the way that we always move. It was bold, and it continues to be bold, to have Sunday school on Wednesday night. Not in our building, but in the community. And yes, it begins slow and small, but it continues to grow. It's only 5 months in. We're only 5 months into it. But already it's beginning to expand in ways, the vision that comes from those who are part. You know, maybe if we did dinner. For 2 weeks now, we've offered dinner at 5:30 before this program at 6. That will now be advertised now that we've got the kinks out and we know we can do this, to reach out to more and more. To say that God's gifts and who we are is not just about us, but it is about the community who is hungry and who needs it. And that we are God's beloved, not for our own benefit, but for the benefit of the world. And this is a parish that I truly believe has grown to believe that. So thank you for not throwing me off a cliff 11 years ago. For instead being patient as we learn to listen to each other, to journey together, and to be led to see how God is calling us out to do more and more in the world. You're going to hear today at the meeting about challenges that we face, but a call not to pull back, but to step in more fully into God's call for us, for the world around us. And what we have to offer, and who we are as a community, is truly an incredible gift to each one of us who find ourselves wrapped in that circle of love and care as we hold on to each other, looking out to the world to see what God has for us next. I don't know if any of you filled out your homework from last week. Yeah, I see faces. The teacher forgot her homework. But I'm serious about wanting to hear from you what you see as we together stand and look into the world. Where is it that the hungry need to be fed? That the oppressed need to be set free? Where is it that God would have for us to take that love and be that gift of God's grace to the Mount Washington Valley?